Welcome to the Grim Reaper channel, where we bring you bone-chilling true stories from around the world. From haunted houses to unexplained disappearances, we have it all. So turn off the lights, grab a blanket, and get ready for a scare. My name is Liza, and I'm a devoted morgue worker in my mid-20s. Every day I'd clock in for the graveyard shift at the city morgue, surrounded by the harsh, sterilized light reflecting off stainless steel counters. Handling the departed was part of my responsibility, a job not many could stomach. But for me, it was a chance to give the silent ones the dignity they deserved. The morgue was my world, my comfort zone, a place where I diligently performed my tasks with an unwavering sense of duty. I've always had a brave heart, and working in a morgue further hardened it. Seeing a lifeless body didn't scare me. Instead, it was a stark reminder of the mortality that bound us all. Being well acquainted with the dead of night, my routine commenced at the strike of 10. I'd check on the bodies, verify the tags, and prepare for any scheduled autopsies. Alone in the maze of the silent dead, I'd move about with a sense of calm urgency. You might find the place eerie if you've never stepped foot in a morgue. To me, it was an organized sanctuary, where stainless steel tables stood rigid and cold, shelves aligned with meticulously labeled containers, and drawers marked with dates and names. They all were arranged in a linear pattern that reminded me of the absolute certainty death held. The most chilling part was the cold storage units. They hummed a never-ending song of preservation. Steel doors hid the eternal sleepers, their slumber undisturbed in the frigid environment. A large observation window painted a contrast between the cold world inside and the relative warmth of the morgue. During my shifts, the morgue always had an unusual tranquility, like a silent symphony conducted by the night itself. The mechanical hum of the refrigeration units would occasionally pierce the silence, but it was a comforting sound, confirming that everything was functioning as it should. At the usual stroke of 10, I clocked in for another graveyard shift, the fluorescent lights flickering a cold welcome. I swapped my coat for the sterile white lab coat and began my routine rounds, checking the tags and ticking off names on my list, all part of the nightly ritual. That night, the routine broke when I reached the cold storage unit reserved for Thomas Keller. A chill that wasn't from the refrigeration ran down my spine. His slab was empty, devoid of the still cold body that should have been lying there. My heart pounded in my chest. We'd never misplaced a body before. With a sinking feeling, I rushed to the morgue logs, flipping through the pages. Thomas Keller was right there. His name was printed next to the details of his cause of death, a suspected overdose. Thomas was a known local, infamous for his run-ins with the law. The police found him unresponsive in a sleazy motel, but no one thought he'd wind up missing from the morgue. I decided to go through the CCTV footage, hoping to find an explanation. It was the last thing I wanted to do at that moment, but there was no other way. Trembling slightly, I rewound the tapes, my eyes never leaving the screen. The stillness of the morgue played out on the grainy recording, a chilling rendition of my sanctuary. And then I saw it. Thomas Keller, the man who had been pronounced dead, was getting up from his slab. My blood ran cold as he disappeared into the morgue's shadows. It was a horrifying revelation. Keller had faked his death. But why? And why was he still here? Horror clung to me like a second skin as the realization hit me. I felt my stomach churn, bile rising up my throat. Thomas Keller, a man the whole town knew for his violent streak, had been playing dead, and now was standing right in front of me. His eyes, as cold as the slab he had lain on, stared back at me, the smirk on his face sending shivers down my spine. The CCTV footage was still playing in the back of my mind, like a broken record, a grisly reality show. The ease with which he had risen from the dead and crept into the shadows was alarming. Now his figure towered over me, his threatening presence filling the sterile room. The dangerous implications of his actions became clear to me. He was on the run, wanted by the police, and he had chosen to hide in the belly of the morgue. The instinct to survive overpowered my initial shock. I had to alert the authorities. I began edging towards the office, trying not to alert Keller of my intentions. But fear, a crippling beast, slowed my movements and made my actions obvious. Keller, not a fool by any means, saw the panic in my eyes, the calculated glances I shot towards the office. With a quick, predatory move, He was standing in front of the office door, blocking my only path to safety. "Going somewhere, Liza," he sneered. My heart was hammering in my chest. He advanced, his steps echoing in the deathly silence. His dark intentions were clear now. With every fiber of my being screaming at me to flee, I took a step back, then another, and another, putting as much distance between us as I could. The threat in Keller's eyes was as clear as the clinical lights above us. His hands clenched into fists, the veins on his forearms bulging under his pallid skin. My heart was drumming a fast, furious rhythm against my ribcage as panic and adrenaline shot through me. Without a second thought, I turned on my heel and bolted. The start of the chase was like a terrifying game, only with my life at stake. The deafening sound of my heartbeat filled my ears as I weaved through the narrow, icy-cold corridors of the morgue. The faint hum of the refrigeration units drowned beneath the rush of blood in my ears. Behind me, the ominous sound of his footfalls echoed, growing louder with each passing second. He was gaining on me, his pursuit as relentless as death itself. But this was my turf. I knew every cold corner, every shadowy alcove. I darted around a corner and slipped behind one of the larger freezers. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps grew louder, then quieter. I peeked around the corner. He was heading in the wrong direction. A glimmer of hope ignited within me, quickly overtaken by the surge of survival instinct. I made a split-second decision, dashing towards the cold storage units. A wild, desperate plan was forming in my head. I yanked open one of the large steel doors and slipped inside, praying that my ridiculous idea would work. Moments later, I heard him. His steps were slower now, cautious. He was near the door. I held my breath, my palms sweaty against the cold metal handle. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, drowning out the sound of the refrigeration unit working overtime. Then, just as he passed the open door, I threw all my weight against it. The door slammed shut with a loud clang, the sound echoing through the silent morgue. A surprised shout came from the other side, muffled by the thick metal door. I hastily spun the lock, praying it would hold him. It did. With Keller locked in the storage unit, my first move was to reach for the phone. My hands were shaking, trembling like a leaf in the wind as I punched in the number for the hospital security. The rings seemed to take an eternity. When the officer finally picked up, I rushed out my story, my words stumbling over each other. There was a moment of stunned silence from the other end, then a flurry of activity. The hospital security was swift, their feet pounding through the morgue in less time than it took for my heart to calm its frantic pace. With the local police only minutes behind, the morgue transformed into a hub of flashing lights and uniformed figures. The cold, steel door of the storage unit rattled as the police confronted Keller, still trapped inside. He fought like a caged animal, his vicious snarls filling the usually quiet morgue. But despite his struggles, the police managed to pull him out, handcuff him, and haul him away. I watched, feeling a strange mix of fear and triumph. The aftermath of the incident was like a whirlwind. Hospital administration was aghast. There were whispered conversations and pointed glances in my direction. The morgue staff, too, reacted with a mix of shock and awe. My normally quiet workspace was filled with worried glances and hushed voices. An investigation was launched into the security flaw that allowed Keller to hide in the morgue. The normally sleepy hospital security became a buzz of activity. New protocols were put in place, new checks were implemented, and additional security personnel were hired. It was clear that the administration was determined not to let such an incident happen again. With the threat of Keller gone, a stillness settled over me, one that was far from the peace I had longed for. Life began to settle into a new normal. The memories of that night didn't fade, but they grew less potent, less paralyzing. I found myself walking into the morgue, night after night, resuming the work I dedicated myself to. But something had changed. Every dark corner held a potential threat, every shadow a danger. My heart raced at every unexpected sound, my pulse pounded in my ears at the slightest provocation. Fear was my new companion, a silent sentinel that kept me alert. And yet, I refused to be swayed from my path. I was more vigilant, my senses sharper than ever. My resolve to do my job, and do it well, had only strengthened. I wouldn't let the fear, the memory of Keller, take that away from me. Sure, the thought of encountering another Keller kept me awake some nights, but then I'd remember the feeling of triumph, the rush of adrenaline, and the sight of Keller being handcuffed. I had faced my nightmare and came out the other side. If I could handle that, I could handle anything.
We hope you enjoyed our spine-tingling stories. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel to stay updated on our latest uploads. Until next time, sweet dreams, if you can sleep at all.